Welcome to Cornell Keynotes. I'm Chris Wofford, and I'm lucky to be joined in studio today by Cornell professor Deborah Streeter and Cornell alum Natalie Egan, who made the snowy drive up from Philadelphia for today's show. So it's great to have you both here on the show today, Deb and Natalie. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here.
Yeah, you bet. So let's get to know you both a little bit before we dive in. In a few moments, Deborah is going to pick up on the interview chair, and I'll duck out of the way. But Natalie, I do want to start off with you and meet you both before we get going. Well, real quick, what kind of business have you been involved in, or businesses that you've started? Give us a little background on your entrepreneurial origin story.
Sure. So first, hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Egan. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Translator, where we build technology designed to help bring people together to have difficult conversations. But in terms of my previous businesses, I've been starting businesses since I was a little kid. I think I had my first real business when I was about 8 years old. I was building. It was a recycling business. I think in high school and college, I had multiple businesses. I had T-shirt businesses. I was making fake IDs for a while. I don't know if that's like a legal business, but I was always a hustler. I wasn't a great student, and being an entrepreneur has always been in sort of my blood. Prior to my current company, I had a venture capital-backed software as a service business, sort of HR technology. So that's kind of the domain I play in now is HR tech.
So Deb, can you tell us a little bit about your work history with entrepreneurs? You're a Cornell faculty also, but within and without Cornell, what's been your experience working with entrepreneurs?
Thanks. My name is Deb Streeter, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. As a faculty member, I spent years teaching undergraduates of all kinds with all kinds of business ideas. That was a really interesting starting ground because I started way back in the mid-'80s, early '90s, and a lot of things have changed over time. Now I have the chance to teach graduate students who are high-tech, high-growth entrepreneurs. And a new group has been the Bank of America Institute for Women's Entrepreneurship. I hope some people in the audience are from that group. We have enrolled 80,000 women in that program so far. It's an online program. We're going to hit 100,000 this summer sometime. So that has introduced a whole new body of work to me, people outside the university, and a very diverse group as well. And so all of those have taught me how to ask the right questions of Natalie.
Speaking of the right questions, so viewers, we will be taking your questions, so please enter them in the chat. I'll be receiving them here on my iPad, or my laptop, rather. So send in your questions as they come in, and hopefully we'll address them and maybe intersperse them in the conversation. But for now, Deb, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. I want to start with the word entrepreneur. And you've already said, this was an early instinct of yours. And I wonder when you started, when you were back doing your, whatever it was, fake idea or whatever.
Let's not talk about that one too much. Okay.
No, I'm interested in what that meant to you then. Did you think about yourself as an entrepreneur? Did that word have meaning?
Yeah. So I think when I think about this question, when this question hits me, the first thing I think of is I didn't really think of the word entrepreneur or the definition of it. It felt more like a calling or like a destiny for me in a way. Like it just felt like I was inevitably headed there for all kinds of reasons. I mean, I think I probably didn't want to work for other people. I wanted to run my own business. My father ran a business. Both my older brothers ran businesses in some form or fashion in their life, and I always looked up to them, and it felt like something I was, supposed to do. The word itself seemed sort of exotic and foreign. It didn't seem like I don't even know like the roots of the word, but it seemed sort of French to me. It sort of seemed to have this flair, but I just wanted to do my own thing. I wanted to solve problems. I liked helping people. We can talk about that and how that sort of was a part of my identity, like people pleasing. But I really loved problem solving. And that just lended itself to entrepreneurship.
And now that you've been through doing many small businesses and then a really serious VC-backed business with an exit, has that changed at all? Is it fundamentally the same, or?
Yeah,
has evolved?
I think it's changed a lot, right? So I think growing up, there was like this like a romantic idea of being an entrepreneur. It seemed like cool. It seemed like it also seemed like a different path than what everybody, following the corporate sort of do what everybody else did kind of thing. My relationship has changed with it very much. I mean, I don't mean, I mean this as a little bit of a joke, but it is, to me, it's more of a curse. Sometimes I wish I could just go work for someone else and not, and when I say sometimes, I mean a lot, right? Because it's a heavy burden to carry to be an entrepreneur. It's hard. It's a hard life. And I think what I used to think of as this like very, kind of special thing that was for people that deserved it or worked for it or wanted it. My relationship with it has changed because I see entrepreneurship involves so much privilege, right? Like to be an entrepreneur requires an incredible amount of privilege. And I couldn't see that at the time. Most entrepreneurs, even entrepreneurs that would say that they don't, have sort of a safety net underneath them. And I don't think I realized like how hard it is for certain people, especially more marginalized or underrepresented folks who aren't at the center of power to become an entrepreneur. And I used to always think, well, like, you gotta work hard, you gotta want it. And I didn't realize like how much else there is going on that allows for people to be entrepreneurs. So yes, my relationship with entrepreneurship has changed quite a bit. And we could talk more about that, but just wanted to answer that part of the question.
We'll come back to some of that. I think in addition to this idea that you just have to work hard, there's also people who think about entrepreneurship, especially younger people, don't realize that if you're successful, you're going to have an operating company. And I wonder what you have found is the skill set you need when you transition from entrepreneurial to operational.
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely a tipping point. I don't think of myself as like a professional CEO or an operator CEO. I think I could in the right circumstances if I had the right team around me. But by default, I'm more like the squishy entrepreneur, like the squishy problem solving early stage. And there's really, and I didn't realize this until probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago with my first real venture-backed business, that there are professional CEOs out there. That's all they do. They operate businesses. And I don't know how they do it. I mean, they're very clinical, but they're not creatives, right? And they're necessarily solving problems. They're operating the business. And it does require a wholly new set of skills. And a lot of CEOs can't make that transition. Or if they do, it's because of their success is so momentous that they can build a team behind them to help them do it. But that's why you see a lot of founder CEOs drop off, right? They get fired oftentimes by the venture capitalists that installed that, or that would install a new CEO to operate it and take it to the next level. Very rarely is it a nice transition either, and I've been through that, so it's challenging.
Yeah, to me, after the entrepreneurs I've talked to over these 3 or 4 decades, the curse of entrepreneurship is really the isolation, and I don't think people appreciate that. Could you talk a little bit about how you've dealt with the isolation of being at the top?
Yeah, I mean, it's very lonely. It's very isolating. Even though you might have a big network and lots of people around you, it doesn't feel like you can really disclose how you're feeling to almost all of them. If you're lucky, you've got sort of a consigliere, which is a term that my lawyer taught me. He said, I will be your consigliere. Like you can talk to me and you can tell me all your fears and your anxiety and what you're worried about with this and that, and I'll help you process it. It's really an important person or asset in your organization is to have that kind of resource. But it's very hard when you can't talk to your co-founder or your employees or your investors about the anxiety that you have running the business, because once they sense that, they might sense a weakness, and now they may not, give you that follow-on funding that you were waiting for. So it is very, very challenging. And then, for me in particular, I had my own sort of sense of isolation the first time I built my business, which was before I transitioned. And then post-transition, so I came out as a trans woman in 2016, it's sort of a double whammy, right? So it's like there's a real isolation in being a trans person, for me, a trans woman. Most people, they don't get me. They don't understand. I don't feel like I can talk to them about what I'm experiencing. And then you layer on the entrepreneurship thing, and I feel very distant sometimes from most people. It's really hard.
Yeah. So, do we have any questions here from the audience?
Not quite yet, but I would like to remind our audience to submit them in the chat. I'll be taking them. I'm standing by. So let's keep going, and I'll let you know when we're teed up.
So I want to talk a little bit more about this whole issue of identity. And I found it really, really intriguing on your LinkedIn page that you under the description of who I am, you listed just different layers of your identity: human being, proud parent, serial entrepreneur, trans rights activist, retired runner. I guess you've done 7 marathons. And newbie inline speed skater. And that is a way of communicating to the world. You have many layers. It's not just one layer, right? And I think that's going to be true of everybody listening. We all have layers of identity that impact the way we present ourselves to the world and the way the world receives us. You've had a very interesting, contrasting experience in building your businesses. You had 2 different experiences. One you had before transition and one after. So I want to kind of untangle that a little bit. So start by telling us sort of like the stage of your life and the stage of your business life when your transition happened.
Sure. You did forget one item. I also identify as an occasional artist. And I list that on my LinkedIn profile to help people kind of understand me. Oftentimes, I get asked how I identify, and I always tell people I identify first and foremost as a human being. I also identify as a parent, and obviously a serial entrepreneur and a trans rights activist. So I do spend a lot of my time advocating on behalf of the trans and gender nonconforming community. And being a trans identified CEO, a trans woman, and a CEO is just one part of what makes me me. In terms of the question, but before I transitioned, I navigated the world. I had so much privilege, I didn't have to think about the word privilege. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't even really know what it was. I knew how to define it, but I didn't really know what my privilege was until it was taken away from me. It's kind of like the air that we breathe. So until you lose that, you're like, okay. So that was kind of an eye-opening moment for me. And I think initially I thought I lost all of my privilege. I was sort of like, woe is me, the world hates me. Felt like I was at the bottom of the barrel. I felt like I went from like the top 1% of the 1% to like the bottom 1% of the 1%. And I realized very quickly that I still actually do have a lot of privilege as a trans woman. I went to Cornell University. I've got a lot of great things in my life that can't get taken away from me. Although, the way I navigate the world now, people hold my identity against me in ways that I never experienced before. When I came out as a trans woman in 2016, I always tell people I experienced bias, discrimination, and hatred for the first time in my life at age 38. Prior to that, I had never had to think about my identity. I'd never experienced, I'd never experienced any sort of threat to my physical or psychological safety just for being me. I'd never been turned away for service. I had never been talked over. All these things started happening to me that I had never experienced before. And, I started this journey to becoming Natalie, which I also will talk about as sort of my journey to empathy. Prior to my transition, I had almost no self-awareness, like zero self-awareness, I would say, just to be like really frank about it. And then, as I started this journey to becoming Natalie, that's when I started developing empathy, and really as a result of developing self-awareness, like understanding who I am and how I got here, allows for me to now start to walk in other people's shoes and understand, empathy, understand other people's lived experience. Prior to my transition, I confused the words sympathy and empathy my whole life. I used them interchangeably, and what I really realized is, obviously, speaking about it now, sympathy is just feeling bad for people. I felt bad that people didn't have what I had, but I couldn't understand it. Like I couldn't understand marginalization. I couldn't understand any of the things that most people had. And now I can really walk in other people's shoes, and I haven't experienced what everybody has, but my range of experiences has broadened so much have real empathy for the world now, and it can that's also can hurt. that can almost feel like a curse sometimes, is to feel what other people are feeling, and
you have to control it because
it's hard. It's hard to shut off.
Yeah. And how do you think self-awareness and empathy, I really like that connection between those two. How do you think that plays out in the entrepreneurial things you're doing?
I mean, I think it's key to success. I think it's part of the reason I wasn't going to be successful or as successful as I wanted to be with my previous business, because I was so insular and I was so focused and was my whole sort of management style was, we don't have time for emotions. We don't have time for empathy. We don't have time for, that soft stuff. And I feel like the business I run today is built on that. I feel like, the key to getting the best out of people is understanding them and meeting them where they are. And if you can do that at scale, right, that's how you're really going to scale, because people have too many options these days. They can work from home really easily. They can work for different businesses all over the world. They can choose to work for less money because they can. It's not the way it used to be 10, 15, 20 years ago. So the world has changed quite a bit. And I think people want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to feel valued. They want to feel respected. And the only way to do that is to have self-awareness and empathy. It's key to, I think, running businesses today, and it's key to success.
Speaking of this whole area of empathy, I wonder if there are people in the audience who would like to be allies that don't really know how to do it. So I wonder what advice you'd have if people want to really be allies to transgender or gender nonconforming and gender nonconforming people. What thoughts would you have about that?
There's a lot of different ways to approach that. I think, in the context of a business conversation, I would say, hire us, if you can, give us a shot. I think trans and gender nonconforming people don't have the same opportunities that cis people do. For people on the line that don't know the word cis is sort of the opposite of trans. So if you're okay with your gender identity, you would be cis. If you're not, you would be trans or gender nonconforming. And I would say, give us opportunities. If you can't hire us, help us get opportunities for education. Use our pronouns correctly. Respect us, treat us as people. I think those are kind of like the core. Best practices or what I would tell the world. Like if I could say that would be the key to allyship for us, would be to, help us out. I mean, we do need help. Trans people need help. We just don't have the same resources and opportunities as cis folks. Hopefully that will change. I think it is starting to change, and it's happening hopefully pretty quickly, but we have a long ways to go.
I'm wondering, Natalie, about how this traveling into your authentic self, how did it have a change for you in the way that you identified opportunities when you started Translator Inc.? Like, did that come out of this renewed awareness and empathy?
Well, the whole idea behind Translator was born out of my transition. Okay. But I would say the idea or the framework, to use a better word or a different word, the way that I build businesses, the way I discover ideas, that's always sort of been the same. I mean, I'm always trying to solve my own problem first. I mean, that's kind of just been my formula since I was a little kid, is like, how do I solve this problem for me? And I think that's really how Translator was born at the same time. But it was born out of a wholly new problem that I was experiencing, which was one of marginalization and, and just, trying to change the world, really. I'll tell you a little story. So the idea behind Translator came from an experience. I was very newly out. I mean, I was probably 3 to 6 months into my transition, and I was in a Starbucks in New York City, and I had this really nasty altercation with another customer. And I remember watching them walk out of the store and thinking to myself, if they only knew my story, If they only knew how hard I've tried to work my whole life to fit in, and ultimately how much of a problem that is, like how much damage has been caused as a result of me trying to fit in my whole life and not being my authentic self. Like if they only knew all of that, they wouldn't judge me this way. And I had this moment as they walked out. I said, well, how could we use technology to help people better understand each other? And that was sort of the original idea. I was like, well, how do we use technology to help us understand each other better? And I realized pretty quickly, it's not about storytelling necessarily. There's plenty of storytelling technology out there. In fact, everybody with a phone can tell their story. There's almost too much stories. What's missing is the ability for people to listen and for people to care. And I felt like that was an area to go to work on. And that's where I discovered the idea of self-awareness and empathy is that's the key to, understanding. You have to understand your own identity first, and then that becomes a gateway to learn about other people's identities. So if you don't have self-awareness, you're probably not going to care about other people's problems. And so the technology that we went to go work on and to build initially really started as self-awareness technology, and it was designed to teach you about your own identity and your own lived experience. And then, again, like I said, become a gateway to learn about others. And I was sort of my own, use case or case study. That was happening to me in real time. And I was like, how do we bottle this? And how do we build technology around this? And I quickly found out there's an entire field of research around it, what I was experiencing myself. And I sort of connected those two things and built from there.
Sounds good. Do we have a few questions?
We do. We have a couple of really nice ones. I'm going to synthesize two questions, which is what we sometimes do here. Maggie asks, how have you worked through the isolation in your business and disclosure of your personal identity within the company or previous companies, right, before Translator? And Dimitri follows up and asks, have you been able to find a sense of community and support from LGBTQ plus business folks? And if so, where and how?
Yeah. So on the first question, and this actually, we talked about isolation and being a CEO can be lonely. Hiding this was also a real factor to consider. And I was running a venture-backed business. We had grown it to 50 employees. I had a board of directors. We had raised $7 or $8 million, which at the time was a lot of money. And I was hiding this. And I was also, a parent of 3 children and, trying to live my life. And I had this deep secret that I didn't even understand. I didn't even know what it was. I was ashamed of it. And so that was a whole, we could go into that pretty deep. But so I had no community then. There was nothing. And I thought I was the only one, and I was very scared. I was very alone. And I spent a lot of time worrying that I was going to get blackmailed or someone was going to say, basically I was worried I was going to get blackmailed. We've got pictures of you dressed as a woman and we're going to publish these unless you give us $1 million kind of thing. And I had so much anxiety about that all the time. So that was challenging. And then coming out as a trans woman, there's a big story behind all that, but it was a stair-step process for sure, and very scary. Originally I was not going to come out, and I can't get into the details of that's a whole other rabbit hole. But when I did come out, it was a slow process. I came out to my family first. Thankfully, I had very supportive family. I think hopefully a few of y'all are listening today. But my family, I'm very lucky. Many trans folks, especially trans people of color, don't have their family stay with them. So that was kind of a big moment for me that said, well, if I've got my family, maybe I can sort of incrementally keep coming out. And as long as I have my family, I'm kind of good. So I remember I came out to my board of directors. That was really challenging. Nobody had any idea, by the way. If you knew me beforehand, I was overly masculine. I was compensating for this by becoming more masculine. Sort of, if I had to describe my personal brand, I might even describe it as toxic masculinity. I would describe it as toxic masculinity. And I used that as leverage to sort of command and control and run a business. But, when I came out, it went from being a liability to being an asset for me in a way that I was not expecting. And a lot of people, I always say, a lot of people ran away and a lot of people ran towards me. I had to rebuild my entire network. I had to rebuild my entire identity. I had to rebuild everything from scratch, and still while being a parent, and still while trying to, take care of my life and the expenses. And it was not easy. Today, just fast forward, how do I handle it today? I have a big network around me of people. I don't love military terms, but it feels like I have an army of people. I feel like and I tell people I need help. I can't do this alone. I'm willing to go out and be on the front end and put in the hard work and take a lot of the shots, but I can't do this alone. So there's a lot of people behind me, currently and in the past, people that are no longer part of this business that helped me get here, and I want to honor them because they helped me get here. And so it's a lot of people and a lot of self-care, and it's a lot of lonely, hard times. And my mom used to always tell me tomorrow's another day, and that's how I got through a lot of this. Is just one day at a time. And there was a second question. That was the first question, believe it or not.
There's some others. Yeah, the other one was from Dimitri about allyship, drawing from other people in the LGBTQ community as sort of a resource for helping you understand or identify with other people or getting advice as you were taken off.
Yeah, so one of the big early mistakes I made starting this business is I went back to my old networks to try and raise money. And I just figured because has a lot to do with my privilege and the way I grew up. I was taught to be tenacious, and if you get knocked down, you get back up. And if someone says no, they just mean not yet, and you just go back to them and you keep working. And I found out that was just a total waste of time. A lot of these people were taking meetings with me because they felt like they had to. And they had absolutely no intention of investing in my business, and they would sort of lead me along, and I wasted a lot of time on that. And I eventually found that if you sit down in front of the right people who are of in this case in the LGBT community or more have more empathy or more marginalized experiences, they were much more likely to potentially invest. So some of the early investments I got from Translator were from LGBT identified people, from foundations, and from early social mission impact, venture firms that were focused, and angels that were focused on helping marginalized folks, get off the ground. And that was a much better use of my time. So that would be if you're out there and of, any marginalized experience, I would go to people that, unfortunately, I would say I would start with people that look like you.
I think let's kick it back over to you, Deb, and I'll let some more questions come in. There's some good ones coming in, though.
So I want to tie in some key entrepreneurial things that you've experienced and will have insight over. And one of my favorite topics is customer discovery. And by that I mean discovering the problem solution fit. And I wonder, talk us through your process of understanding that problem solution fit and how conversations and other things contributed to your understanding of the problem to be solved. Yeah, so
I'm glad we're talking about this. I think I have a slightly different approach to building businesses than a lot of people, or at least I've seen. That's what my experience is, what I've seen and what I've heard. I tend to build my product with the market, not for the market. And that oftentimes starts with a lot of research and consulting and trying to get a really strong understanding of the market and the needs, which sounds sort of obvious on the front end, but I think a lot of people just kind of come up with an idea and go write a business plan and then try and start a business. I mean, I know they don't really do that, but it's a different. They're building a business without. I sort of build it through the customers. And so both of the major businesses that I've run started off looking like consulting companies. They look like my first business, just to give you a little bit of insight into that. So I used to work for LinkedIn. And this, by the way, we were talking about Dave Chappelle, one of my teachers, not the comedian, but a teacher that I had at Cornell. His name was Dave Chappelle. He told us to, start, if you want to build a business, go to work for another business and figure out what they won't do, or what they're not doing, or what they don't do very well. And I thought that was really sage advice. And so that actually kind of was part of the reason I went to go work for LinkedIn, was to sort of discover this world of professional social networking and where's the opportunities. The world is changing. There's got to be a lot of disruption here, which is another thing Dave taught us was where there's disruption and change, there's opportunity. And usually the bigger this disruption, the more the change. And I thought LinkedIn was going to be like very disruptive, which it was. And in 2008, I joined the company. And in 2009 and a half, I left the company to start my own consulting and training business focused on LinkedIn. And that business grew so fast, we couldn't handle the services side of it. And one of our clients, which was one of the big four consulting companies, said, we don't want your training anymore. We want a product version of this. And so they were telling me what they wanted, right? So I was just out, servicing it, trying to figure out the problems. And all of a sudden they're laying out on a whiteboard, this is exactly what we want. And they showed me the original API calls. If you all know what API calls is, sort of a technical term for how we could connect technology with LinkedIn's platform and build effectively a LinkedIn app. And I wasn't a technologist at the time. I didn't understand SaaS really. And all of a sudden we were starting to build a product inside the consulting company. And, fast forward a year and a half, we raised a couple $1 million, the initial money to go scale that. And that we built that business based on all of that consulting, insights that we were getting from our clients. And then when I started Translator, this time around I was a little bit smarter. I did the exact same. I followed the same playbook, not to use like a sports analogy, but I basically said, you know what, I don't understand this space, loosely what we call DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. So I need to go out and start to understand it. So I started a DEI consulting company, DEI training company. But the whole time, this time intentionally, we were basically incubating a SaaS product inside that company. And so, if you fast forward, it's been 7 years since we started that company. I've interviewed hundreds of chief diversity officers, employee resource group leaders. I've seen a lot. And so the product that we have is a result of all of those experiences. And the last thing I'll say on it is I do almost all the sales for my company. And my dad taught me at an early age, if you want to be successful in business, you've got to do sales, at least for some point in your life. You don't have to do it your whole life, and it's stuck for me. But I do a lot of the sales. And what I always tell clients is I say, look, I'm the CEO of the company, and we're a small, sort of seed stage company, and we all do a little bit of everything. I get to do sales, and I love that because I'm not only on the front lines developing relationships, but I'm also gathering requirements. And those requirements, I'm constantly thinking, like, where does this fit? What patterns am I seeing, and where does it fit, and how do we prioritize that into our product roadmap? And I've got a 10-year product roadmap in my head that we haven't got a chance to yet to build, but I know exactly what to build. We just need the resources to do it. So it's a slow process. It's not for everybody. But shout out to my CTO, Josh, for sticking with me through this.
I want to lift up one of the aspects you just talked about, because in viewing businesses developed over time, I see this mistake all the time. You did not allow your lack of technical expertise to block you from saying, we can figure out how to serve this problem. We have a solution, problem-solution fit. And if you were a technology person, you would much more likely say, I know how to build this technology, and you would build it, and then you wouldn't be able to sell it. So I hope everybody kind of takes that to heart. And so I want to shift. I think it's a natural transition now to talk a little bit about the business to business world and the B2B world. And I think you have more than 20 years of working in this digital transformation space. And I wonder if you can tell us more about what does digital transformation mean to you?
Yeah, so digital transformation, it's been called different things at different times, but it's just the idea of like automating and productizing manual workflow, like things that used to be done manually. And digital transformation is sort of like taken over every department of every company by now, almost everything, maybe with the exception of culture, but that's happening as we speak. But digital transformation, it took over marketing, right? So marketing used to be all done manually. Sales used to be done manually. And digital transformation changed the world of marketing. It changed the world of sales. I mean, now you talk about sales automation and marketing automation. That's digital transformation. But digital transformation is like every back of house function that used to be done with paper and all the things that we used to do back in the day has been changed. There's digital workflow. So that is disruption, right? We talked about like things that are changing. So a lot of entrepreneurs made a lot of money off the changes in just those specific departments. And then they could even splice that up and say just vertically or, within the professional services industry, we're doing back-end automation for, this particular function. So digital digital transformation's been around for a while. And I've been playing in the B2B world for a long time. As I mentioned, my dad told me to get into sales. So when I graduated from Cornell Hotel School, I was in the hospitality industry, and I had a lot of frontline services. I was, from, hotel overnight manager to, dishwasher. I sort of did a little bit of everything, and I knew it was time to get into sales. So I went to work for one of the only companies that was doing sales that would hire me without sales experience, which was a company called Ecolab. And Ecolab, just by default, sort of started to teach me B2B selling, which is one business selling to another business. And so it sort of started there, and then it started to grow, obviously, and I was good at it. I wasn't expecting to stick with it very long. I wasn't planning on staying at Ecolab very long. It was a really tough, nasty job, basically selling and servicing dishwashers and laundry systems in institutional organizations, including hospitals and jails. I mean, I've been into a lot of prisons to service their dish machines, and so I learned all about the back end mechanics of like how businesses run and how budgets are set and why people buy things. And what I found out a lot of times, and this is a great way to start your business. It's not sustainable, but like people like to do business with people they like. I mean, that's just something I learned. It's not a great way to start your business, but from a sales perspective, you can count on some sales sometimes because people just like you. So that's how I learned business, and that's my dad and his advice. So thank you, Dad.
Love the shout out to a parent. You can't. The only thing that would be better is shout out to a grandparent. But anyway, I'm wondering what you think people misunderstand about B2B. Like people say, "Oh, I'm going to get into the B2B market." What comes to your mind? Like you don't even know that this is going to happen to you. What kind of thing comes to mind?
I mean, it's
a naivete, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a world where there's just so many things that you can't see, and you don't understand why decisions are being made, and there's a whole ebb and flow, and the timing of things lining up to sell traditional enterprise, especially software, to an organization. It's like all the stars need to align. Mm-hmm. So not only does that need a person like you, but then they need to have budget, and they need to get sign off, and there needs to be a need, and then you need to have the procurement cycles need to line up, and it can be very, very hard. And there's ways to hack that. There's ways to get into the enterprise without going through that traditional cycle. But I think probably one of the biggest things I've learned about B2B that is not necessarily expected, or that you might just know, is like the way that the economic factors can impact B2B. You could have everything going for you, and then the rug just gets pulled out because of something that happens on the other side of the world. And that can be really, really hard. That's a hard lesson I've had to learn multiple times. And sometimes you get so full of confidence that you think nothing can stop this. Mm-hmm. So that's probably first thing that comes to mind. The second is, and I think you'll probably appreciate this. I don't know if we've talked about this in previous conversations, Deb, but people tend to obsess with like product market fit. Right. It's like, and you even hear investors talk about, do you have product market fit? Do you have product market fit? And they probably teach it in like entrepreneur classes at Cornell and like, but a great entrepreneur, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago taught me that if you think about like concentric overlapping circles, there's product market fit. And then there's a third circle that most people don't even know to acknowledge, and it's economic fit. So what you really need is product market economic fit. And you could have great product market fit and be dead in the water because the economics of your business don't work for all kinds of reasons. Either your price is too high, or your implementation is too hard, or the client they can't take the product. The cost of delivering your product internally is too high. So there's all these economic components to your to your product market fit that people don't think about. And I think that's one of the hardest things to nail, because you fall in love with your product market fit.
Right.
And I think we're in the process of, really looking at that. It's in real time right now. It's like, what are the economics of our business and how do we shift things? That was sort of the evolution that I was talking about earlier. It's like, how do we've got great product market fit. How do we evolve because the economy's changed and the world is changing. So that's a real hard part about about B2B.
And that's what we call the business model fit. That's that economic piece.
Sure.
And then there's always timing and many other things like regulation. There can be so many outward shocks that can impact the timing of what you do.
Yeah. One of the things that my brother taught me this, it was a hard, I didn't believe him, but I have realized he's really right about this, but he's just also said just luck is such a huge part of B2B.
Huge.
And it took me a long time to actually experience that and see people that, I was like, wow, that person got really lucky timing wise, right? Like, because there was another person right next to them with maybe a better product and maybe worked harder and maybe deserved it more, and they just didn't get it. And now and that business went kaput. So luck is a big part of this, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how hard you work. Some people say the harder you work, the luckier you are, but sometimes it just doesn't matter.
Yeah. I think luck is luck. And
luck.
Timing is a big part of it and so forth. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, we have some questions that are related to the thorniness of the venture capital space, everything that can kind of go down in that world. Sarah asks, have you ever met a transgender VC? Do you feel like you were booted, maybe they misinterpreted the events here, but booted from founder to operations because of transitioning? I was fired for this. Pamela asks, are there ways to protect yourself? And I think this is an interesting place to go, to protect yourself from being ousted as CEO or figurehead of a company. I don't know. Any advice for people who may be experiencing this in their own world?
Yeah. So first question, there are, to my knowledge, just as we speak right at this moment, there are no venture capital firms that are, run by a transgender individual or gender nonconforming individual. And there are no funds specifically that I know of that are designed to invest in trans and gender nonconforming folks. And that is something I aspire to do, by the way, if anyone wants to help me, is to build a venture firm, focused, social impact venture firm focused on trans and gender nonconforming folks. And there's a whole conversation we could have about that in terms of the philosophy and how to get started. Like, I expect that a lot of the money that we'll invest initially will not be returned, because we need trans and gender nonconforming entrepreneurs to fail, to learn that lesson, and then come back and be stronger. There's a whole that cycle happens for other folks that are more towards the center of power, and it happens naturally their whole lives. But there are some trans and gender nonconforming investors out there, at least nonconforming that I know of, that are like in the venture world. I do have a trans angel investor into my business. I can't disclose their name, but just for privacy purposes. But there's not a lot, right? I mean, there's just not a lot of representation and a lot of trans venture investment happening, because there's not a lot of trans entrepreneurs that then eventually become trans investors. So that's kind of like the first layer that has to happen in order to make that market become real. Is we need more successes of people that look like me or that have my experience or story in some form or fashion. There just isn't enough of us yet, which makes it very hard to raise money, because VCs in particular like to invest in formulas, in patterns, and things that they've seen. And if they've seen, okay, that this looks this way, and I've seen this, and it's just 1 degree different, I'm going to invest all my money in that. But when I show up as a trans woman, they never see anything like me, and it usually takes an entire partnership to sign off on an investment these days. So it only takes one person to say, you know what, I don't feel comfortable with this. I've heard of this. There's always this story. It's like, I've heard of this trans person that was had mental health challenges or this or that, and I'm not going to put my money in there. And the reality is we all have mental health challenges, right? That's not just that's not just trans people. But because of that part of my identity, it's made us very hard for me to raise money. There's a very small group of trans entrepreneurs, venture-backed entrepreneurs out there. There's a lot of trans entrepreneurs. So the difference I'm calling out there for folks on the call is venture-backed. that have raised real institutional money. There are hundreds of thousands of trans entrepreneurs out there that are doing entrepreneurship not for the glory of it, but for survival. Right? They're building businesses in their basement because they can't get hired. And so that's a wholly different conversation. But we need systems to help make more of this happen. And I know that was the first question, so I got to ask to repeat the second question.
Let's see. Sorry, let me check back here. Who was it that asked that one? I can't recall. Do you mind if I skip around?
Well, you asked two questions at the same time. I can't process both at the same time. So.
Let me kick this one out there because this one makes connections that I think you were taking us to, right? So Larry asks, as much as having your privilege taken away from you, or some of that privilege, as you note, has been hard, how has it made you more resilient, or has it made you more resilient to the up and down experiences of entrepreneurship, in which opportunities, resources, and other things are withheld or taken away? And maybe it can go the other way too, right? Resilience and lessons hard learned in entrepreneurship. Has it helped you through the transition? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it's sort of exhausting, but I'm always told like how resilient I am, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't even want to be resilient. Like I'm just tired of being like, I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm tired of being resilient. I just want to not be resilient and just be able to go through my life without having to be resilient. Like I have to be resilient to go to the grocery store. I have to be resilient to pick up my kids at school. Like I'm always potentially facing some sort of blowback. I mean, if I open up my phone and go to the news, like I have to be resilient, right? I always have to have thick skin. And so it's certainly been helpful. I mean, it's made me tougher. It's made me be able to navigate really challenging, really big challenges that normally would have, most people would back down from, but I don't really have a choice. Right. I mean, for me, it's like just survival. Right. I mean, it's like, what am I going to do? Not go to the grocery store? I mean, I guess I could do like DoorDash or anything like that. But that's like a privilege, too. That's more expensive to do that. But every time I go to my particular grocery store, if I have to deal with the manager, I know I'm going to get misgendered. So I generally don't want to deal with her. Like, and it's just really can like frazzle me at the end of the day, after doing all my work and dealing with everything. So it's like I'd rather just pay too much for that item in the moment than complain to the manager because I know they're going to come out and call me sir. And it can really be deflating. So, I mean, I've built up some really tough skin, but at the same time, I'm also kind of fragile sometimes, like I'm just like a little bit on edge. But yeah, I mean, I think the skills, I'm in a great friend of mine wrote a book on, the 5, best practices for highly resilient people, and I'm in that book, and she tells my story. It's amazing. Her name is Taryn Stejskal, Dr. Taryn Stejskal, and people are always kind of wondering and oohing and ahhing about resilience, and at some point though, it's hard. I mean, I want to just be able to just go to the grocery store. So
I think there's an interesting parallel experience. The Institute for Women's Entrepreneurship. Our population is more than 90% women of color. And this is one thing I learned from that. They've been schooling me for the last 4 or 5 years about going through life as a non-white person. And they say the same thing, like it's exhausting. And so I could, if we have people in the audience from that population, I bet there's some resonance going on there.
Yeah. Can I just say one thing? So,
of course.
I learned this from a coworker of mine early days with Translator. It's sort of think of it as like a little formula. And the idea was just a simple way to think about privilege is the more privilege you have, the less energy it takes to navigate the world. Right. So the less privilege you have, the more energy it takes to just move through the world. And so just a simple way to think about privilege.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Hey, I want to check back in. It was Pamela who asked the question. We were talking about VC funding and discrimination in that space, and Pamela chimed back in and said, I was the second question. Are there ways to protect yourself from being ousted as founder and CEO? So maybe this is where, the practice is getting ahead of the legalities, or, how this kind of works.
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind is something my older brother taught me. And this is the kind of thing that, if you don't have an older brother that is got this kind of experience and has, been in this world, you don't have this advice. So there's so much privilege in just getting this advice from my brother. But he taught me when I first started this business, and his exact phrase was "stack the board." And I didn't really know what that meant at the time because I didn't know what a board of directors was, and I didn't understand the philosophy. I didn't understand. I was so headstrong that I didn't think this would really ever matter for me. But the idea was to start your board of directors at almost day one, because if you start your business and you run it for a year or two trying to be successful, and then let's say you are kind of successful and you go out and raise money, one of the first things those people are going to do is say, well, you need to have a board of directors. And so if they're at a leverage point where they're helping you create the board of directors, they're going to build into that moment the ability to remove you. And so if you start your board of directors on day one and you make it your best friend and your other best friend, it can help you. It won't ultimately help you, long term, but it's like building in things like that in early days are little strategies that can help protect you from being ousted. Another thing I would tell people is write your own employment agreement. Like when you're starting your business, create your own agreement with yourself and sign it and use that in negotiations later when they try to tell you oh, we're not going to pay you for all that back salary. That's just going to get rolled into, and you're going to be able to say, no, I'm owed this money, as opposed to, and by the way, on that same note, accrue all that back pay that you're not paying yourself. That's a really key piece of advice I would give any entrepreneur. Because a lot of times people are just I'm not paying myself. And it's well, you should be keeping track of how much you're not paying yourself, because then you can use that in negotiations later. So there's a lot of things that we could do. Those are just kind of three that came to mind to protect yourself, whether you're LGBT or not. Otherwise, I would say surround yourself with people that like you, that look like you, but be diverse, right? I would say, create diversity. Actually, I shouldn't have said it the way I said it. I would say make sure you've got people that look like you, but also have diverse representation there as well.
And I have to jump in and say, and I knew you kind of threw this one off, but having your best friends on the board is probably not the solution. You need allies on the board who are good board members for some reason. They have some expertise you need and so forth. They need to be on your side, but building boards, you do have to be careful if they're personal relationships, because you don't want to lose that relationship over business, and also, they may not always back you. You just don't know.
Well, that's so yes, what you said is true, but that's a later stage move. Because you're going to have that's when you're going to put in really great people, and you're going to have the leverage to swap them out because you started with your best friends.
Yeah.
And when you bring on your best friend, you should tell them look, and again, this is going to sound horrible. And my brother, this is almost verbatim what my brother told me. He said, the people that you put on your board, you should. This was a litmus test. That are they on your side? You should feel comfortable that you could cover yourself with gasoline and give them the match and tell them to light it, and they would do it.
Wow.
That's what my brother told me, and I was like, whoa, okay. So that's going to be a filter on who I put on my board, because I need to know that they're got my back no matter what. And again, these are early days. These are day one kind of thing. And then when you get to the right point, then you put in the right board members that are the right fit to move your company to the next level. You're not going to be able to have your best friends there the whole time. It's not going to happen.
Definitely not.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. I wonder, as long as we're talking about funding and finance, I wonder if you ran into what I think is one of the biggest problems for new young companies is cash flow. Did you run into any cash flow? What was it like? Did you ever not be able to meet payroll?
Oh my God, yes. Oh my gosh, yes, of course. Finish your question.
I was just going to say, why don't people understand this ahead of time? It's like a simple math problem, cash in, cash out. But I know very few entrepreneurs who haven't been taken by surprise by it.
Well, I don't think they teach it very well, in my opinion. I wasn't a great student, and I wasn't always paying attention, but I would have paid attention to that part maybe. But I think, when you especially when you're building a SaaS business, the investors are incentivizing, a lot of times, unfortunately, growth at all costs. So you're willing to spend more than you're making. If you've got a retail product, that's different. You just can't buy the inventory and sell it if you don't have it. I do think there's creative ways to work around that. And yes, absolutely. I've been faced with not paying payroll, not paying myself, running. Like I always tell people, if you want to work with me, especially at the kind of like, kind of co-founder level and you want insights into everything going, it's like not for the lighthearted because we're going to take this thing to extremes. Like one of my CFO, who's been with me through both businesses, CFO, sort of head of HR, has told people, I've overheard him tell people like, Natalie is willing to drive this thing on a dark road at night with curves in the rain, like, and you got to sit in the front seat with her. And it's because I'm willing to take those risks because I know that the cash is coming. I know we're going to be able to pull it off. Like I know that I can get a customer to write, to cut me a check early for that invoice, or that, we can, make this move. And so I've always got a lot of tricks up my sleeve. So I think part of the reason I can do that is because I believe in my business, and, believing in your business is not enough. But I think if you've got a real healthy business and you've got real revenue, you can make it through cash flow gaps. You just got to be creative, and you got to have a network, and you've got to be able to make calls, and you've got to be able to hold your breath for a while and have the team make it through with you. It's a lot. It's very challenging.
Yeah. It is something to learn about before you start a business so that you understand how it's going to work. It won't prepare you
I was just saying,
adequately.
It's like you can't know what it's like to have kids until you have kids. I mean,
that's so true.
Yeah.
Well, we have 3 or 4 minutes left, and I want to end with one of my favorite questions to ask, which is, in your experience, what are 1 or 2 things you wish you had known before you started on the more professional path as an entrepreneur? What do you wish you had known?
Gosh, I mean, some of the things I've already talked about. Just, if I had the ability to, really talk to that person, if I could go back in time and say and give myself advice, there's part of me that would say maybe my advice would be like, don't do this. Like it's just too hard. It's too stressful. Like it's going to push you to the edge too much, and it's going to take away from like what you could really be enjoying in your life with your kids and in your family. So
that person wouldn't have listened to you, though.
Well, but I mean, if it was me in the future, like if it really was me in the future, maybe I would, maybe, but chances are not. I mean, if anyone else told me that, I wouldn't believe them, because I was just so bullheaded and I believed in myself. But that's probably one of the biggest things, is that, it's not all glory. It's in fact, it probably won't be glory. Even if you think you've got a great product and you've got great momentum, like things can still go really, really wrong. And I think that's probably one of the hardest lessons out of this, is that I just so many times have had the rug pulled out from underneath me when I thought we were there. Yeah. Like I was like, we are there. This is what we've been working for. We are at that moment where it's going to convert and we're going to sell this business for, and many, many multiples. And then the rug gets pulled out from underneath it, and you just all the way back to reset. And it's really hard.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, that aspect of the way luck comes into play, the way external factors can come into play. Is there anything else that's kind of taken you by surprise in the journey? Could be positive or negative way.
I mean, I think there's one of my old investors told me that people will always disappoint me. And that was like such a disappointing thing to hear. I was like, no, that's not true. I believe in people. And I think what he meant was that, you're the only one that you can really lean into, that's going to show up every time and do all the hard work. And yes, people have disappointed me, but like so many people have delighted me. And like so many people have like saved me, and over delivered and changed my life. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for so many great people. So I think you just got to take both. I mean, some people are going to disappoint you, and some people are going to just absolutely surprise you and change your world. And that's the luck too. It's like sometimes you just got to put yourself out there to meet people. Like some of the best connections I've made are pushing myself to like go to the event or do the thing that I really don't want to do because I'm so tired and I'm so exhausted from being disappointed or let down or whatever, and I show up to the event and I meet that one person that opens up a whole new world, and it changes everything.
Such a great place to end, I think. Really.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing so much personal and also
course.
sharing all your insights. Really appreciate it.
Deb, it's such a pleasure. Chris, thank you for having me too.
Oh, you bet.
Thank
Natalie
you, everybody
Egan,
online.
Deborah Streeter, great to have you both in the studio. Thanks, viewers. Really quality questions, good engagement going on. I want to thank you all for your input and your interests. As a note, again, this keynote is being recorded. It's available at the same URL. And we've got a bunch of links to share that we probably should just do one more time before you take off. Professor Deb Streeter's Women in Leadership Certificate Program, Women in Product, Executive Women in Leadership. These are all courses for which Deb is faculty author. Excellent online education as it relates to this. We also shared the Bank of America Cornell program link as well. So, Natalie, thanks a million. Deb, lovely to have you.
Thank you.
Thanks, viewers.